So good day, everybody. Welcome to this special session at the Innovate for Cities conference. My name's Richard Salouzis. I'm a professor from the University of Twente in the Netherlands. And this session is about avoiding mal-mitigation, integrating city-level climate action plans with clean air action plans. And we're going to be talking about, especially about the experiences of Madrid and Mexico City. Unfortunately, the conference website didn't contain all the information about the wonderful panel that we have for this session, but let me just briefly introduce them. We have four speakers, the first of whom is Robert Cahu, and Robert may be well known to some of you. Robert's got a master's degree in public policy, but he's been working extensively for UN Habitat for many years, primarily on cities and climate change, and was one of the lead coordinators of the work in that area. He's been involved and helped to set up the Planners for Climate Action network, which brings together planners with an interest in global, regional, and national planning from various planning associations, from planning research and education networks, and also from practitioners. And at present, Robert is a senior consultant to UN Habitat's climate change team. And Robert's going to be the first of our speakers, and he'll be kicking us off with some recent research that he's been doing on this issue of whether or not it's possible to integrate these two types of plans and how that can best be done. And in that research, he looked specifically at Madrid and Mexico City. We'll be having a second speaker, will be Beatriz Cardenas, who is from Mexico City. She's the director of air quality at the World Resources Institute in Mexico. She's a co-leader of the Global Air Quality Program. She's very experienced on the use of various types of tools for air quality management in relation to emission inventories, air quality forecasting, pollution awareness through participatory science, as well as looking for different solutions to improve air quality. The third speaker will be from Madrid. It's Professor Rafael Borga. And Rafael is a professor in the Department of Chemical and Environmental Engineering at the Technical University of Madrid. He's leading a laboratory of environmental modeling, and he has more than 2 decades experience working on air quality and atmospheric modeling. And he's been advising UN Habitat as a senior consultant on air quality issues, as well as other activities for UN ECC Convention on Long-Range Transboundary Air Pollution, for example. And the fourth speaker is a colleague of mine, is Diana Rakin, who is associate professor at my faculty. And Diana's been working also for a long time in the climate change field. She's a coordinating lead author of Chapter 17 on decision-making options for managing risk of Working Group 2 for the IPCC 6th Assessment Report. That's a mouthful, but Diana's got, I think, an enormous amount of experience in looking at how cities and governments are trying to develop effective mitigation plans as well as adaptation plans, and some of the issues and the problems that arise when you see maladaptation is taking place and what the impacts of that. So she has a great amount of experience looking at European cities, but also cities in the United States and elsewhere. And she will reflect on primarily on the kickoff story of Bob and the experiences from the 2 cities that we have here. Just before we get started, I would like to make a couple of quick announcements. I understand that there are some people who may be watching live on YouTube. That's very nice and a very warm welcome to you. But if you would like to interact with us, you are also able to register on the conference website and to join us via the Zoom link that you will be provided with. And that means that you will be able to either post chat messages or even speak to us via the microphone. So I hope that you will, some of you may want to shift over. There's also, I will point out, because we are looking at a session which is of interest probably to many Spanish-speaking people, we do have, there is a button called Interpretation, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. And if you click on that, you can choose to have English translation or Spanish translation. So if you are having trouble following me or any of the other speakers who will all be speaking in English, or if you are Spanish speaking and you want to pose a question, you can make use of that button. So welcome everybody, and without further ado, could I invite Bob to share his screen and get the ball rolling? Thank you.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Bob Cahu, and thank you, Richard. And I'll be speaking on integrated clean air and climate action planning in Madrid and Mexico City, giving an introduction to this topic. This presentation grew out of some UN sabbatical research that I conducted a couple of years ago. And I'm grateful to my organization, UN Habitat, for supporting that, and also to University of Twente, and particularly Richard and Diana for guiding that research. So I'll be speaking about why integrated planning at the city level, levels of integration. I'll be giving a high-level look at Madrid and Mexico City with a focus on analytic support to plan decision-making. Two of our later speakers will be talking more in depth about Madrid and Mexico City, but just an initial comparison before providing some initial conclusions and recommendations. So first of all, why integrated planning at all? Why doesn't the city just have a separate clean air plan and a separate climate action plan, as indeed some cities do? Well, there have been calls to try to integrate these two plans into one. One such call is from the organization Clean Air Asia, that supports a number of cities and organizations in Asia to address air pollution. They comment that co-controlling air pollution and greenhouse gases will be more effective than targeting each individually, and also can offer some cost reductions. They also call for a very rational planning process, identifying alternative measures, then subjecting them to cost-benefit analysis. And later in this presentation, we'll start to take a look at how feasible that really is, how to what extent we can really do that. So we do see, though, when we see these calls for integrating clean air and climate action, that really there are three reasons that people give for doing that. The first reason is to identify a more optimal set of measures than if we looked at either clean air planning or climate action planning by itself. And we can start to understand that when we first look at one common decision support tool that is sometimes used for mitigation planning. This is a marginal abatement cost curve. And if we look at this, we see that the horizontal axis, we see a number of measures, different kinds of measures displayed all in the same framework on this graphic. And but the different measures have different impact on mitigation. That's shown as you move to the right on this horizontal axis. Some have a big impact and some have a narrow impact. You can see that by the width. And then the vertical axis are the net financial benefits of this action. And the idea is that options that appear below the horizontal axis offer some net financial benefits over time. They're financially feasible now with current technology, and options above the line now have a positive net cost per year. They may still be worth it to mitigate, but there is a net cost to that. So this looks like a great decision support tool for a rational decision maker. You can start with the low-hanging fruit, the measures that are below the line, and that are also cost effective and financially viable, and pick some of the best ones, maybe one or two of the net cost items, and you're done with your planning. There's just one little problem with this. This is only looking exclusively at the mitigation side of things, but we also want to avoid mal-mitigation. And this chart shows that not every measure that is designed to reduce greenhouse gas emissions is also going to benefit air quality. A number of actions do have both benefits, and they're shown in the upper right quadrant of this graphic. Energy efficiency, for example, that both has climate mitigation benefits, but also has air quality benefits. But there are other actions, if we look in the lower right quadrant, that while they have a climate change benefit, they have an air quality detriment. Increase in uncontrolled diesel would be an example of that. There might be a modest greenhouse gas emissions benefit to this, but there may be quite a detrimental effect on a city's air quality if they go that route. So this is one reason to look at measures through both lenses when we're trying to pick a set of measures to put in a plan. A second reason people cite is to make decisions more efficiently. Why should we have two plans when one will do? And a third reason could be to build and sustain political support for mitigation action. The benefits are global to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but the benefits of taking air quality actions are local. People can see and notice the benefits of improved air quality. So if we unite these two agendas, we can maintain support for climate action. So those seem to be three strong reasons for trying to integrate these two agendas, but how easy really is it in practice to try to integrate them? So in this slide, we try to look at the different options for integrating these two agendas. And moving from left to right, starting at the left, the first option is no integration. And this would be the case when we would have a separate air quality action plan and a separate mitigation action plan, and they don't really talk to each other. And there are some cities that this is the circumstance. The disadvantages are there's a double effort, there may be overlapping actions, and we don't avoid mal-mitigation. The second option then is when there are two separate plans, but at least they're cross-referencing each other. They try to complement, not duplicate actions. They might try to measure the actions that are being taken in the other plan. This is an advance. The third measure is what we call partial integration. And this is where there's been some effort to integrate these two agendas, but it hasn't been perfectly done. It hasn't been thoroughly followed through the entire plan. Maybe the objectives call for integration, but in reality, if we examine it, the two agendas are not really integrated. This could even be depicted with one of these two circles larger than the other to show if one agenda is favored over the other. And then we get to the stage of full integration. And you'll see here that we've broken that into two types, a basic version of full integration and an advanced version of full integration. And why do we do that? Well, a full version of integration, I think, would involve really understanding the full range of the costs and benefits of different measures from air quality and climate perspective, and then basing decision-making on that kind of an information. But can we fully do that, or are there some shortcuts we have to take? Let's unpack this a little bit. So when we're trying to combine benefits for clean air and benefits for mitigation, how do we do that? What would be the common metric for doing that? When we have a climate action plan, we're used to looking at what is it going to do in terms of reduced greenhouse gas emissions. This is a great metric. We can use CO2 equivalent to put different greenhouse gases into the same framework. But one trouble, how do we stack air quality benefits in terms of health or productivity on top of this? We can't use reduced greenhouse gas emissions. Air quality plans may look at reduced pollutant concentrations. Improved health outcomes is a great way to compare measures for their benefits, but we can't stack greenhouse gas emission information on top of this. So we have a little bit of an apples and oranges situation when we try to analyze these benefits all together. Can we use put everything in terms of dollars or euros or some other unit of money? There's some problems with that. When putting value on greenhouse gas mitigation, do we use values that we're getting from the carbon markets? That might be a little problematic. Some people are squeamish about putting a price tag on human life or health benefits, but it is possible. But there are even further difficulties. For the best possible estimates of impacts of a given measure on people, you have to gauge not only a change in emissions, then you have to do some very difficult ambient air quality modeling over the geography of the city. And if you want to get to health and productivity benefits, you have to see where people live and how that air quality is going to affect different populations. And there are even additional factors that have to be done if one does this thoroughly. And this sort of a complicated analysis is very difficult to do iteratively to support a dynamic decision-making process. So for these reasons, we are seeing that analysts have to take some shortcuts when trying to support decision-making. Full basic version of integrated decision-making may be the best that we can hope for, at least at present. So that being said, let's take a very quick look at these two cities, starting with Madrid. We do see that they have had, over the last 15 or 20 years, they've had a flow of both air quality plans at the top half of this diagram and a flow of climate change mitigation plans. But then they really tried to bring these together in 2016 with their Plan A for air quality and climate change. So let's take a little quick look at that. This does have very balanced specific objectives as far as improving air quality and reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Both of these specific objectives are quantitative, which is a great help for ex post plan evaluation. And we see that the analytic support to this prioritization process, first of all, it was they sought an iterative process, and this is what a rational decision maker would look for. That you may start with a set of measures, and then you see what is their impacts on air quality or greenhouse gas emissions. Then you keep some of those measures and you discard them, and maybe you analyze some others, and iteratively you get to your final set of measures that you put in a plan. So this is a positive sign. This iterative support, analytic support, was based on, again, they had to find a reasonable way to support this, and the route chosen was a preliminary estimate of the effect that main measures might have in terms of emissions of nitrogen oxides, particularly nitrogen dioxide and carbon, greenhouse gases. So they supported this iterative process at the level of emissions modeling, as Raphael can certainly explain this better than I. And this was done as a first step in defining tentative ambition level for the plan in terms of reductions, while at the same time helping to decide on the final set of measures to go into the plan. And but then when there was a final set of measures arrived at, there was even more detailed modeling of its impacts in terms of air quality, starting with the emissions from 7 substances, but then doing a ambient air concentration modeling of particularly of 3 key air pollutants on the geography of the city, and a qualitative look at the health impacts. On the mitigation side, this was just what are the CO2 emissions organized by sector of expected from these different measures. This was a final check of the plan, as I understand it. So now a quick look at Mexico City, equally rapid look at this. We do see that there was one stream of plans taken over the last 20, 30 years on air quality on the top half, and also starting around 2005, there were climate change mitigation plans also. Interestingly, in the case of Mexico City, the mitigation work was done, planning was done at the city scale, while air quality work was done at the metropolitan, and even now, today, at the megalopolitan scale. So as far as barriers to trying to integrate these two agendas, I think one can sense there may be a difficult here when we have two different organizational arrangements, two different scales that may complicate the effort to try to integrate. So for this purposes of this discussion, let's take a look at these local strategy and program for climate action, because they contained a very interesting innovation, and the highly respected Centro Mario Molina supported this, and others supported this analysis. The innovation was the integral treatment of greenhouse gases and black carbon. In fact, this entire document doesn't talk about greenhouse gases. It talks about greenhouse substances. So they're also looking at black carbon. And there's not time right now, but there are very interesting arguments why black carbon is important here. There's a climate and clean air coalition that is explicitly interested in bringing black carbon into the climate discussions. So the goals of this strategy are address both greenhouse gases and black carbon. Now it's interesting that these goals are both the goals are expressed in the document with a mitigation focus. At the level of objective, there's not a discussion of trying to improve air quality with health benefits, perhaps because that's being addressed more at the metropolitan scale. But there are quantified goals for both greenhouse gases and black carbon. Notice also that they could not present a unified target because CO2 equivalent is not being used. There have been attempts, but it's not being used widely to date or recognizably to date to include black carbon into a unified framework. So two separate sets of goals here. The analytic support to the prioritization process was that there was an analysis of cost efficiency. They did want to give decision makers information to evaluate costs and benefits. And they do this in a very interesting way, looking at social benefits or externalities, including rough estimates of the effect of improved air quality on health and productivity. And they did this based on expected emissions from the different measures. There isn't any evidence in the plan document that they in supporting decisions that they analyzed to the extent of ambient air concentrations or population exposure. But they did, for example, produce this very interesting graphic of it's a marginal abatement social benefits curve. This is different from the diagram we saw earlier that just looked at the financial viability of different measures. This actually contains an effort to include social benefits and quantify them in terms of monetary terms, in terms of pesos, and this quantification of social benefit is including in terms of health and productivity from improved air quality. So they are, although making one or two shortcuts, they are indeed supporting decisions with some quantification of in monetary terms of the benefits of improved air quality. Of the 69 measures in this program, 14 of them were expected to contribute to mitigating both greenhouse gases and black carbon. An example is the regulation of heavy diesel-powered construction machinery. So just a couple of initial conclusions and recommendations. Should we integrate or not try to integrate these two agendas? I think that there are real severe disadvantages to developing two completely separate plans. Trying to integrate the two agendas has advantages. It may help maintain support for climate action and also have benefits as far as avoiding mal-mitigation and efficiencies of one plan instead of two as well. On the planning cycle, a suggestion would be for cities to consider integrated inventories of emissions of air pollutants and greenhouse gases. There are interesting experiences in both Madrid and Mexico City on this. This is a precondition to more integrated action. Allowing time for an ex post review of plans to understand what worked, what didn't work. Can modeling be improved? An important step before a next phase of planning. When possible, we should build time into the planning cycle for this. Oftentimes, this is disrupted by the political cycle of changes of administration, but when possible, this should be done. As far as scale, there are some very important measures for mitigation and air quality that can only be undertaken at the metropolitan scale. I think transportation planning, public transportation to support good commuter trips into the city is a great example where you really have to go past the city boundaries to come up with some great measures and projects. Some again, difficult to do in reality, but worth the effort. A couple of suggestions for donors, international organizations. Try to encourage joint climate and clean air action. Certainly, there's a lot of funding for climate action that can be provided in a way that it can provide for clean air action as well. And consider tools and additional guidance to support integrated inventories, modeling support, and action plans. I think there are other implications of the concept of mal-mitigation, such as in the sphere of international trade, trying to avoid the dumping of secondhand diesel cars on the global south to worsen their air pollution problems. There are implications such as that around this concept, but they're a little bit outside the scope of this present exercise. So thank you for this. There is a research paper that discusses all this and additional insights that's in a draft final stage. If anyone wrote to me when we have this paper finalized in the very near future, we'd be happy to share it. Thanks very much. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot, Bob. Thanks for getting us kicked off. The way we propose to do this is that we'll have the four speakers give the presentations. Bob was a little bit lengthy, but as he's sort of setting the scene, I didn't have too much trouble with that. But I think if we can focus a little bit, maybe be a bit more condensed on the two case studies and Diana's general reflection, then we will have ample time at the end for some discussion and interaction with the audience as well. I did put a little note in the chat box that if you do have questions you'd like to raise, do put them, either write them into the chat box or indicate somehow that you would like to speak, and we can see when and how we can offer you the microphone. Let's move on then. Beatrice, could you explain a little bit more about give your reflections on the situation in Mexico City, please?
Sure, you can all see my screen, right?
Yes, we can.
Well, first of all, thank you to Richard and Robert for this invitation. And as I have mentioned, this is really interesting. Some of us who have been working on air quality, myself, and then join into this intersection of climate change, have tried really to join these two themes into one, sometimes with some success or not. So I will just highlight some of the points that Robert has already mentioned in his paper and in his review. So let's see, how can I do that? Well, just to keep in mind that when we talk about Mexico City, or we talk about metropolitan area, or we talk about megalopolis, we're talking about three different scales. So in the figure, you can see Mexico City, And then the black part is metropolitan area, which used to be Mexico City, which is an entity, an state. And then it's surrounded by some municipalities of another state, 2 states. And then what we have now is the megalopolis, which is a group of 7 states which share the airship of our, in the central part. So when we're talking about that, just to remember that when we're talking only on Mexico City, we're talking about 9 million people living in Mexico City. If we go to the second ring, we're talking about 20 million. And even if we go to the megalopolis, we can talk about more than 30 million people, right? And we all share one atmosphere. We all share the same air, and the air, as we know, the pollutants move from one place to another. So it is difficult when we try to implement some plan to control emissions that are in your jurisdiction, but you are actually don't have any control of those sources. So that's important just to keep in mind. Well, the big issue is air pollution. We all know that it's a major environmental risk. And here what you have is what is the global burden of disease. If you take as a global level and you compare 1990 versus 2019, the rank of air pollution, well, for as a global base, it doesn't change, even after almost 3 decades. In the case of Mexico, there's some progress. So it used to be number 5, environmental risk, and now it's 9, which is not necessarily a good, I mean, as you will see, we have not yet into that. In the terms only on Mexico City, remember those 9 million people living in Mexico City, the global burden of disease for 2019, it estimates more than 4,000 premature deaths attributed to air pollution, mainly to particulate matter, but also consider actually ozone. In Mexico City, as many other cities, we have a very complex mixture, not only PM2.5, we have a high level of ozone at least in one season of the year. And we also have very high levels of NO2 in several parts of the city. So if you consider the mix, then that's an issue to consider. Well, yes, Mexico City is considered a success story because over the last decades, the air pollution has been controlled. The ambient levels of many pollutants have been reduced. What you see in the graph that I'm showing to the left side is just the annual average of ozone. Since 1990, when you have a very good data quality assurance from the monitoring station, this is ground monitoring stations, and you also have in the right part is what is the difference, the relative difference to the concentrations that we have in 1995 versus 2018. So you can see that most of the ambient concentration for these pollutants have been reduced. Well, the question is that enough? And no, we still have in Mexico City, in the metropolitan area and in the megalopolis and most cities in Mexico, we do not attain our own air quality standards, not the new WHO standards, of course. So we do have a lot of challenges still. Well, the good thing is that even if we haven't attained our own standards, just a comparison, this was a study done in 2018 by a group of health experts. That they were comparing 1990 versus 2015 ambient concentrations. And in this case, they were considered ozone and PM2.5 and the mixture. So what were the health benefits of improving the air quality in Mexico City? It was only for the 9 million people, remember, not the metropolitan area, the attributed deaths avoided would have been better, higher. But what it identified is that there were a lot of benefits. In total, they estimated 22,000 avoided premature deaths because of this reduction. And then, yes, it was already mentioned by Robert, should you put a number, a money number of this? Well, we all know that even if it's just a small number of premature deaths avoided, that's important. But even if you put a number, that would be important. We have also seen that in terms of the air quality, because of this high coverage of air quality monitoring in Mexico City, we have a lot of data to show how is the exposure of, depending where you live, is the concentration the same? And no, we know that the concentration is not the same. The people are not exposed to the same level of air pollutants, not to the same pollutants. So this is just an example of PM 2.5 from 1990 to 2015. You can see that all the colors actually were, they are clearer. So that means that you have less concentration that you had in 1990. So people are less exposed, but you still have, as you have in 1990, a big inequalities in the city. So people living in certain parts of the city are exposed to higher concentration. So we do have that issue. And if you had a map that you were showing the metropolitan area, you will see that areas that are farther from the central part will be having different trends of exposure. And in this case, PM 2.5, not only secondary particulate matter, but primary particulate matter, it changed. And we have seen also that is an issue, inequalities. Who is exposed to what pollutants and what type of pollutants? Ozone, as we all know, that it's a secondary pollutant, so you will see differences, not always related to the socioeconomic level of the people. PM 2.5 is, at least with primary pollutants, you can see that. Well, we all know now, you have all seen all the amount of scientific evidence showing some relationship with the air pollution exposure and COVID. So this is a relatively new study published last year, I guess, showing with all the data that we have in Mexico City that yes, there is an important relationship between exposure and mortality because of COVID. So why, what happened? Among all the measures that have been implemented in the last 3 decades, I will say that they were oriented to air pollution mainly, and lately with some climate change mitigation objectives, as Robert mentioned. The two programs are separate, trying to interconnect, you will see. But this is just an example of all the measures that were focused on controlling emissions from vehicles. We still have some challenges, particularly for diesel vehicles. Mexico City is now buying, for instance, only public buses with Euro 6. But in Mexico, as a country, we still have this challenge of, do we have enough ultra low sulfur? Mexico is also a country that produces a lot of automobiles. So we all also know that Euro 5 is not longer allowed in many countries. So what about that big stock? So that's also a challenge of what the industry, what is the industry is going to do. So that is not only climate, not air quality. So one important thing to mention, why Mexico City was able to do this improvement in air quality and reduction in emissions. Well, something that has already mentioned also by Robert is, do we have the tools, not only to evaluate with certain type of metrics, but also to understand what is in our atmosphere, or at least in that air share. So I'm here just showing an example, and the good thing is that all this information is available in the Mexico City platform. So you can download even the report from 2004. They have done a lot of effort of having emissions inventories every 2 years, 2 or 3 years, at least from 2004. And since 2012, the emissions inventories are integrated. So, which is good because it allows decision makers to identify what is the impact of certain measure, not only on ambient air, criteria pollutants, but also in greenhouse gases. And as Robert mentioned, black carbon has been estimated and actually measured in Mexico City for a long time. I will say that it's because of a long history of collaboration among the scientific community, not only Mexican community, but international communities. So we do have data of black carbon, elemental carbon, organic carbon, since even the late 1990s, which allowed also to identify what are the sources and are there any changes, and using black carbon also a proxy for health. There is a lot of discussion, but yes, we also know that there's a difference of having black carbon emitted from fossil fuels versus biomass burning. As Robert mentioned, there has been many air quality action plans since 1993. These plans are actually done between the two levels of governments. So it's Mexico City, the state of Mexico that integrates a metropolitan area, with a strong participation of the federal government, particularly in the first air quality action plans, because in that time, Mexico City was a federal district. It was not an independent entity. So it was a very strong participation of the federal government. And as you can imagine, the funding was also an important, not only local or national funding, but also international funding. And then, well, in terms of the tools, also a lot of information on how air quality is, what are the concentrations in different parts of the city. So also almost every year since the last 15 years, there's an annual report showing what is the concentration, what are the trends of air pollutants. So that's important to have these tools and to evaluate. The other two tools that I will mention is the Air Quality Monitoring Network. As I mentioned, it's operated by Mexico City, but it covers the whole metropolitan area. Not the whole metropolitan area, but it covers metropolitan area as well. So that also allows you not only to see what you are breathing, but where the air pollutants are coming. And in terms, as I mentioned, where do the people live and work in Mexico City is different. A lot of people do not live in Mexico City, but work in the metropolitan area, and they travel every day, and the exposure is different. The other tool has been very useful, and I guess that's key for as Robert mentioned, for Madrid, is the air quality model. In this case, it's just a visualization of air quality forecast. And that plume that you are seeing shows very clearly that the plumes in this case is from a refinery, a power plant. Those plumes of air pollutant, in this case is SO2, will come into the city and will affect no matter what you do in terms of mitigation of your own sources. As I mentioned, there is a lot of information from many different field campaigns, scientific field campaigns, the 2003 and the 2006, but this is the 2006, an example that it was an international collaboration, not only see what are the emissions of a city, but also what is the impact in a bigger range. The Mexico City Air Quality Action Plan, because it has this strong tool of emissions inventories, it allows to identify of all the measures that have been at least listed in the Air Quality Action Plan, if they have been implemented or not. They can identify what at least are the emissions reductions in terms of tons. So you can see here, because of the integrated emissions inventory, they can identify not only criteria pollutants, but also CO2 equivalent and even black carbon. I didn't mention here, but they could also estimate how many avoided or emission reduction from black carbon have been done. Then as explained by Robert, there is a climate action plan. This is the latest. It was actually published last year. So the good thing is that they have some strategies listed, and one of them is air quality. So it's good. Now they are recognizing air quality plans. At least they were mentioning that they will have some impacts on climate CO2 reductions. The climate change action plan and the strategy, it mentions something about air quality. So towards this integration that Robert was mentioning, well, at least they are referring each other. Although I guess that's a lot of opportunities there. So they also identify what are the main sources of emissions from both greenhouse gases as well as criteria pollutants. They have a couple of actions, but you see, it's just identify. It's not really, I guess there is a lot of room for improvement. The intersection from the Air Quality Action Plan is not yet clear. I mean, we don't know because it's been developed right now, and Mexico City and actually the metropolitan area have announced that they will be soon outside soon. So some final remarks. So yes, there is enough scientific evidence of both human and ecosystem health impacts due to air pollution in Mexico City. I didn't talk about impacts to vegetation, impacts to agriculture. Mexico City has a rural area in the south that actually produce some agriculture products and has been affected, is being affected every day. There are a lot of important improvements on air quality, but unfortunately, we are not yet there. PM 2.5 and ozone are a problem. And definitely all the air quality action plans for Mexico City, at least over the first 2 decades, were the main vehicle to obtain these reductions. And definitely Mexico City has been the lead among the metropolitan area and now the megalopolis. Mexico City has a lot of management tools that allows that integration to happen. As Robert mentioned, we need some integrated emissions inventory. We need powerful air quality modeling. And also it's important to have access and transparency in terms of the data. That's also a key issue. And as I mentioned, you can go to the Mexico City site and you can download every information, all the reports, and even the data from the air quality monitoring stations. That also allows that a lot of the, particularly the scientific community, can also use the data and complement and contribute to the analysis. That's not happening in many cities, particularly in the global south. The access to data is not there. The latest climate change action plan has some potential to reduce greenhouse gases, some air pollutants. They start talking each other more clearly, but really not fully integrated, as Robert mentioned, which is interesting, just how to actually go to the second step. And I guess learning from Madrid would be a good thing. And well, yes, we have been working in silos. Air pollution, atmospheric scientists, one side, climate change expert on the other one, sometimes competing for even resources and a spotlight, which is difficult. We have to do some better in communicating, particularly to the citizens. We have one atmosphere, and there is a lot of confusion sometimes from our citizens. Yes, I want to do something for climate change. Yes, I want to improve my health, but sometimes it is a confusion. And of course, it requires a lot of knowledge from decision makers and key stakeholders of what is the atmosphere, what are the processes, the key processes, chemistry and physics processes, what are the sources? And especially sometimes, it doesn't matter if you are not reducing a lot of tons of emissions of one pollutant, but where do you reduce those pollutants, and who are the communities would be most benefits? So sometimes that's also a challenge. The metrics doesn't work always, only on using tons of CO2 equivalent. It doesn't work with tons of PM 2.5, especially when you have difference in toxicity and differences. Who are the ones who are being exposed the most? Thank you so much. And I hope I didn't go over too much, Richard.
We have a bit of flexibility, Beatrice. Thank you very much. It was great to hear a bit more and see a bit more of the detail of what's going on in Mexico City. Now I would like to ask Rafael to give us a similar sort of in-depth insight into Madrid.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. So to provide this overview on what's going on in Madrid, I will show you a brief picture of the recent plans in Madrid then to reflect on what are the actual integration options and how can we integrate the two policies. I would use the Plan 8 that Robert mentioned as an example. Then we will see how that went in terms of emissions and air quality trends, and I will close up with some remarks. So I borrowed this graph from Robert because I think it shows very clearly that how the different policies are integrating. I think it's only natural that the plans and the strategies in I think most cities are primarily driven by air quality targets, because it's like where the impacts are more evident. In our case, this has to do with the European standards that are quite restrictive, especially for NO2. From the beginning, it was set up in 40 micrograms per cubic meter. We are struggling to meet that. Never happened so far. So while the climate action was initially derived from national or international commitments, originally the Kyoto Protocol. And then it was interesting to see how this new paradigm was emerging, like trying to accelerate local action to create the global impact. So cities are becoming more and more active and joining initiatives like the Covenant of Mayors of C40 that make a strong impact on recent policies in Madrid. So the problem here is that the two questions are completely different. So the role of different administrations, like for instance, in the case of Mexico, we saw clearly that Mexico City is only a part of the problem, and you have different administrations and different governments, and they all share the responsibility and need to be coordinated. So how to do that in terms of air quality or climate change, that is completely, it takes a completely different approach. The reduction goals and the targeted sectors might not be the same. And definitely the temporal and spatial scales are completely different. So how can we get to know the right answers? So in order to answer that, I will show the example of Madrid when we are relying on a local inventory, emission inventory, which is quite detailed and is based on the European international methodologies and that are already harmonized, sorry. And then we also use a multi-scale, multi-pollutant air quality simulation system. Like it's a multi-scale because air quality is in nature is a multi-scale problem. So if we combine these two tools, then we can have this overview, this global overview. So we can produce this kind of dashboard where we can see what are the issues. So as you can see here, this is the source apportionment of NO2 annual mean, and this will be PM 2.5 annual mean. So this is air quality. This is what we breathe in the city, right? So NO2 is our main concern in terms of exceedances. PM will be representative of the single most important air quality pollutant in terms of health impact. And then we can see here the greenhouse gas emission, right, in terms of CO2 equivalent. So once we have a look at this, we can understand what will be the impact of different measures. For instance, if we look at this, it's clearly that the air quality in Madrid is dominated by road traffic. We don't have big industries or so on. So pretty much if we act on the traffic, like for instance, reducing mileage or working or playing with the speed limits and traffic management, we will have an impact on this 75% of the local contribution. But we also have an impact because in the end, everything is connected. So the metropolitan system, so compared to Mexico, Madrid is a small town, but still, it's an interconnection of the metropolitan area. And whatever you do in the city center, it will have an impact outside. So you will have an impact not only in the local sources, but also in this regional contribution, right? That's important. You will have also a strong impact on PM. And it's interesting to note that 1/3 of that particles are made of elemental carbon. So that's also important for climate, for forcing. And the contribution to CO2 will be less significant. Also, you have the technological measures, like for instance, there is a clear tendency to electrified mobility, at least in cities. So we will have the same impact on NO2. We will have less impact on PM for different reasons. But we will have also an impact on CO2. But that will only make sense depending on how the power generation mix is in your particular country. Because if it's not based on renewable energies, these emissions will move from here to here. So you, in the end, you will be doing nothing because we are talking about long-lived substances. And also you can realize that if you really want to reduce your CO2, your greenhouse gas emission levels, necessarily you need to work in other sectors as well, like for instance on the residential, commercial, and institutional. So that's buildings. So you need to work on improving the thermal isolation, better heat and air conditioning system, and also working with these refrigerating substances. So being that said, based on that information, Madrid came up with the Plan A, which is the local strategy for 2006 and 2020. These are the goals already mentioned by Bob. So pretty much the plan was intended to meet the European air quality standards, and for that, most of the different measures were focusing on mobility, on road traffic. According to this iterative simulation in terms of emission, we came up with a global estimate of the reduction of NOx emissions of 40%. So that's something like 3,000 tons a year. While the reduction on CO2 was quite modest, it's something like 3%, right? These are the results in terms of the expected results in terms of air quality. As you can see here, this will be the base year, so like the situation previous to the plan, and that would be at the end of the plan, at the 2020, which was the time horizon. So you can see that PM, we can have across the city, average over the city, a decrease around 9%, 23% of NO2, even larger decreases for peak concentration peaks, like 1 hour concentration, and moderate increase of ozone, which is something very interesting as well, but I don't think we have the time to go into the details. So there's a clear asymmetry between the greenhouse gases and the criteria pollutants in emission abatement rates. And that's because, as I mentioned, we were focusing very much on road traffic, and CO2 emissions are not so relevant in terms of for that particular sector. And also something interesting that is interesting to note is that technological options for road traffic are far more effective for NOx than CO2. As you can see here, this is interesting. These are the labels that we are using now in Spain to assign to different vehicles. So the cleaner will be the 0, and then Eco, then C, and then B, right? And those are very old cars. So as you can see here, I don't know if you can see it, but the orange, it represents CO2. So there are no very large differences between these technologies, right? So it has to be eco, or especially it has to be 0 to see a clear descent, while in terms of NOx, it's a clear gradient. So this is important. And that's why measures like the Madrid Central, which is a low emission zone, was far more effective reducing NOx than CO2. Use technology, I think it's easier to reduce NOx by means of technological measures. And this is the result. As you can see here, this is what we got over the 2 last decades. And as you can see here in orange, CO2 emission, they went down, both direct emissions and indirect emissions. It's absolutely important to consider indirect emissions, especially in a place like Madrid, where we don't produce our own energy. It's consumed from power sources that are located elsewhere. So it's absolutely crucial to keep track of these indirect emissions. And as you can see here, we also have a clear descent on NOx emissions. So these last years is kind of stabilized this trend. And it's also interesting noting that, as Bob mentioned, air quality is pretty complex. So you can see that the air quality levels, they do not necessarily match the trend of emission abatement, because there are many other factors involved, chemical and transport processes. We have a closer look. We can see that in the time horizon of Plan A, we got something like 10% reduction of CO2, which was more than expected, because there are different sectors that they were decreasing emission as well, like the waste management sector or solvents or others, right? But as I mentioned, direct emission is only a small part of it, because you need to look at the need of national, or I might even say supranational policies. Because those are extremely important in terms of what is the emission factor of your electricity. And as you can see here, fortunately for Madrid, for Spain, is going down very sharply, and is expected to keep going down. So it makes sense to rely on electricity, but only if you have a national policy to support that. But still, so things are going well, but still we are far from target. So this will be the actual trend. right? And this dashed line here will be the target for 2030. So there's still a long way to go. This is an overview of air quality that you can see here. This is the emission trends of NOx, declining as well, similar for PM 2.5. But as you can see here, the trends in terms of air quality, this is made with different selected air quality monitoring stations across the city. You can see that the background levels are close to meet those 40 micrograms per cubic meter, but we still haven't managed to do the same for traffic locations. So NOx emissions were reduced by 15% in the reference period, and the air quality levels are not there yet. And we have a bigger challenge because, as you know, the World Health Organization revised their guidelines recently, so they moved from 40 to 10. So there's still a long way to go. I'm not sure that's attainable, but that's a different question. So it's difficult, but it can be done. I mean, in terms of, we have the example of the last year was absolutely exceptional. So as you can see here, that the non-technical measures during the confinement due to COVID-19 last year, they have a very strong impact. According to our estimates, we saw a reduction in CO2 emission levels around 60%. So matching those NOx and PM 2.5, so this is a huge decrease. And that has a clear impact on air quality. You can see, well, this is not so easy to analyze, but we estimated an improved air quality levels of NO2 by 60%, right? So 40% of what will be expectable. So to end up, already it was mentioned that it's a must to have a local inventory that is integrating both greenhouse gases and air quality substances, because otherwise you will be completely on the blind. And the combination with the multi-scale air quality model, that provides a huge advantage because you have all the information that you need. I think that the recommendation is whatever you are planning for, you need to evaluate the outcome of any individual intervention, both in terms of air quality and climate change. And this is important if we talk about different organizations or governance issues that probably we will have the opportunity to talk later on. So more specific remarks or conclusion from Madrid. As you saw, we have positive trends in both greenhouse gases and air quality, but we are still due mainly to these measures targeted to the road traffic. But we are still far from the targets, and those targets, ideally, we also look into the net decarbonization of the city and to meet eventually the WHO air quality guidelines. And that requires far better coordination for sure, but more ambitious measures, including technical and non-technical measures. And that has to be combined and has to be harmonized at the different administration at the local, regional, national, and also international level. So thank you very much.
Right, thank you very much, Rafael. That's another great presentation with a lot of technical insights into looking at which show the effects of the different policies and plans, the Plan A, especially of the last several years, and how it has enabled Madrid to reduce some of its emissions. Though not enough, as you said, not yet. Diana, could I ask you to continue and or sort of to wrap up this part of the process?
Yeah.
Talk about the mitigation and adaptation planning, please. And
Richard,
maybe before doing that, we have one question in already. If other people have other questions they would like to pose to the panel, please let me know.
I was thinking whether we wanted to answer these questions first. What do you think? Whether we
do I have a bit of a break here?
Yeah,
yeah.
Because these first three presentations, they fit very nicely together. So I thought maybe when we have a person particularly on those matters.
Okay, I'm quite open to that suggestion. Brenna Walsh posed the question then to hear what the speakers think about what to prioritize in developing cities who may be at the very beginning of thinking about addressing greenhouse gas emissions and mitigation and air quality together. What's really important to consider? Maybe just a quick response from maybe let's reverse the order a little bit. Rafael was just speaking about Madrid. Let's maybe 2 minutes, Rafael, and then Beatrice, and then Bob.
Yeah, well, honestly, I think that in those cases, the priority should be given to air quality, because they're suffering from serious local effects and people are dying. So and usually in those countries that the greenhouse gas emissions per capita are much lower than in other parts of the world. So I think, I'm not sure this is contradictory what we are trying to say here, but in those cases, I think that the starting point more naturally is to start with these air quality measures and try to have a look on that. At least they are not they don't have negative impacts on the climate side.
Okay, Beatrice, your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, I guess it would be similar. I mean, if we have these tools, as Rafael also mentioned, like emissions inventory integrated and a model, you're able to start at least with centralized on people and your ecosystems, right? And then you can start doing some iterations. What if I do this, and then coming into ideal, better process. But what is difficult is just starting from estimating tons to be reduced without considering who will be benefit and how you can reduce the health impacts that you are already causing with very high levels of air pollution. So that's why I guess that's the challenge, because sometimes we are moving farther from that. And yes, we all know about all the impacts of climate change, but we have today the health impacts and in both people and ecosystems. So I would say that start with that and do some iterations. And if you have the tools, as Rafael described with a multi-scale model, you can do that. You can identify what will be at least the best opportunity that you have, and definitely involve other authorities, because it's not an issue only of cities. That's a lot can be done by cities, definitely, but not everything. We still have one atmosphere, and that tells a lot.
Bob, could I ask you?
Yeah, I think just along the lines of what Rafa and Beatriz have said, I think if air quality is the entry point in a developing country city, take that as the entry point, do it, but do a screening to make sure you're not going to hurt greenhouse gas emissions while you're helping air quality. Maybe a good point to mention, it's a good time to forge a partnership with a local university. If you have one that has some technical abilities, this is a very important relationship to build up from different perspectives, and maybe try to initiate that both on the air quality and climate change perspectives.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Maybe I just touching on, as both Beatrice and Rafael were talking, there was a lot of attention to data in both presentations, and especially with Rafael on modeling. I'm aware that there's also quite a lot of attention these days for low-cost sensor networks. I imagine that the sort of sensor networks that we have in Madrid and Mexico City are really high-quality sensor networks. These are official systems which are highly standardized, well-maintained, etc. What do low-cost maybe Rafael, just your first thoughts, is there a place for low-cost sensor networks in looking at air quality issues or greenhouse gas emissions?
Sure, I think they're a game changer, but we need to manage our expectations because they are not yet. So I think they will help us to have more thorough monitoring schemes, and also to look into this environmental justice question that Beatriz was talking about. And they are helping now. Everybody is using them, assimilating those results with different types of additional data, because to be honest, on their own, they're still not reliable enough to have decent monitoring. So I think they already play a role, but that will increase in, it will be more and more relevant in time. We need to improve our mechanisms to, especially for post-processing the signal. So yeah, I think it will be needed. There's also the other debate of less measurements, more measures, but we should not forget about that.
Okay. All right, let's maybe move back then. Diana, would you like to just wrap up the formal presentation part, and then we can have a more discussion as well?
Yeah, thank you. And actually, it touches upon the question that Brenna mentioned, because I'm getting to that at the end. Sharing the screen and then starting the presentation. Oops. So we've talked about air quality and mitigation now mostly, but here I want to broaden that a little bit more to integration and interaction of mitigation, adaptation, and air quality, and touch upon a couple of these terminologies that are pasted here, because co-benefits, synergies, side effects, trade-offs, all of that is important in that discussion. And I am here presenting on two types of research that I've led with colleagues from Europe across the EU 28 countries, which is called the Euro LCP Initiative. And I'm here kind of presenting answers for these two questions. How are adaptation and mitigation integrated in the EU local climate plans? And what can we learn about that integration and the approaches and best practices? And then I want to come back to the air quality aspect. So the first one is that we did look at 885 large and medium-sized EU cities and found that 147, so 17%, had an integrated adaptation and mitigation plan. This means that they were covering adaptation and mitigation in the same PDF or same policy or same document. We actually see that there is a strong, that the focus is here, or most integrated plans are in France and the UK. And this is due to the fact that they have a national policy, both countries, that demand local authorities to develop climate plans, local climate plans, and give guidelines out that both adaptation and mitigation should appear in that plan, in these plans together. So if you then take out these two countries and look at the rest, that one is here, you see that the UK actually is further advanced than France because they have more moderate plans. And when you take out those two and look at the rest of the countries, you actually do see that Spain is rather advanced, because Spain is that country among the other countries that do have integrated plans with most moderate integrators. So here we compare low integrators, moderate integrators, and high integrators, and the same here, low integrators, moderate integrators, and high integrators. So Spain here has 60% of their plans reclassified as moderate integrators, more than any other of these countries. And how we did that, so kind of what I showed you on the slide before was already the end result. Now I'm digging deeper and show you a little bit of how we did that. We looked at the different parts in the plan For instance, identifying and understanding, where we talk about impacts, emissions, baselines. Then the envisioning and planning stage. So we looked at what kind of measures and policies are suggested, and then how are they implemented or going to be implemented, and is there a monitoring scheme? And then we had a number of aspects that we checked whether they are present in the plans. For instance, do the plans have a greenhouse gas emission profile, an emission forecast, a vulnerability profile, future climate projections, both greenhouse gas emissions and vulnerability profiles, and both emission forecast and climate projection? Do they tackle uncertainty? Do they talk about cost estimates and climate hazards in detail? So now here the color code means that the green ones shows that the plan had integrated adaptation and mitigation. Orange means that that was separated, and blue means that orange that it was separated and focused on adaptation and impacts, and blue means that it was separated and concentrated on emissions and mitigation. So here we saw, for instance, that only 50 plans of those across the sample had a greenhouse gas and impact profile. So 74 plans of 147 of all integrated plans, yeah? And even half of that have both a forecast. Then in the next category, envisioning and planning, we have here those integrated aspects. So respecting the time, I'm now only talking about the green bars, where consideration of both greenhouse gas reduction targets and adaptation objectives were present. These are approximately, I think, 56%. Then we had consideration of adaptation mitigation interrelationships. So did the plans actually really look at co-benefits, trade-offs, conflicts, synergies? And in that we only had 38. So 26% of the plans considered those. So there is definitely a lack, and yeah, the European integrated plans and cities should look and concentrate more on that. But actually a large number had to come in and a joint public education and outreach strategy. And here in implementation and monitoring, looking at the green ones, there is really, I would even say, a serious lack of finding common funding. And that is maybe also something that goes out to the wider policy community on the national level. We need funds that could be accessed at the same time and that can cover both. So if you need to apply or you need to spend money either on mitigation or on adaptation, it also, of course, hampers integration. But we have 97 plans of 147 that have a common policy and regulatory framework, about, again, 50% a common coordination implementation body, so institution, and a bit more, maybe 60% common monitoring procedure and framework. So those three aspects that I had here as call outs, I think these are the most serious I see. But then we actually ask, is that a problem? And how to do integration? And there now I'm getting a little bit, just a second. Polly, I am still in the talk. I'm still talking. Just a second. So how to do integration? And there I am opening up a little bit more. And we looked at dedicated versus mainstreaming approaches. So how do these plans actually, how would we classify them as dedicated plans or very broad sustainability, resilience, and therefore mainstreamed plans? Yeah. So this is for mitigation. So we had now again the 885 cities and looked at all the plans, so not only the 147 integrated plans, but all plans that we could find. And we looked at those, and when here we show green, then these are very dedicated plans. So mitigation, in this case, yeah, mitigation plan, very dedicated on mitigation. Whereas when we here show yellow, orange, and darker orange, these were development plans, sustainability plans, or in the case of darker orange, even energy plans. So these we called then mainstreamed plans, whereas those larger, broader ones concern horizontal mainstreaming. So where actually the policy diffusion process is brought into the, is made broader, whereas a vertical mainstreaming is where you concentrate again into other sector fields. You again see that the UK stands out, yeah, but also here that Hungary and also here Bulgaria, Romania have a couple of integrated plans. These were here vertically mainstreamed mostly. And then for adaptation, the picture changes a little because we get much more mainstreamed plans in the UK and many more here in Eastern Europe, mostly sustainability, resilience plans, but also then here vertical plans that are flood plans or heat plans. And this is the overview where you can really see here across all cities and here down here across all plans that across the cities we have by far fewer adaptation plans than here mitigation plans across all cities. But then when you then decipher that in terms of per plans, you see that many of the adaptation plans are actually what we would classify and call mainstreamed. So this means in numbers, 29% of the adaptation plans were mainstream plans, and that's why broader, whereas only 1/3 of those were of mitigation plans were mainstreamed. And what we learned from that is that adaptation is more understood as a multidimensional and holistic process that needs people participation and engagement. We see that because mainstreaming was also very strong in Eastern and Southeastern Europe, and not only in the economically strong countries. But we also see that horizontal mainstreaming needs a lot of political commitment, resources, endurance, and time, which might potentially take away the focus of climate change. So we had a couple of parallel policy processes observed in the EU, where we saw once, for instance, gender policy is mainstreamed, that dedicated target of gender mainstream gets diluted, and sometimes a concentration and a focus is needed. Lesson number 1 is it is advised to start with the joint plan or first develop a dedicated plan or approach with a clear agenda and then mainstream. So in that sense, sector plans are important because they really keep us focused on the most important aspect. And that is my answer also to Brenna's question and what Rafa and the other speakers say. Air quality plans are important, and it could be it would also be supported by our data. that starting with such a sector plan and then later see whether you don't do any harm to, at the same time, see whether you don't do harm to mitigation or adaptation is actually a good thing. Lesson number 2, we saw that when doing integration, currently a lot of cities actually use green infrastructure, but there are also other sectors like construction, where interrelationships are high between adaptation and mitigation. So there could also be a focus on that. And in particular, with the terms of, in terms of infrastructure, there is, of course, large potential for air quality too. But I want to also highlight what Beatrice said. Please be aware of social justice aspects when integrating and when looking at green infrastructure. And this is my lesson 4. Planning for air quality through green infrastructure has particular high synergies with adaptation and mitigation, which could be an approach for regions where our air quality is particularly low. So there you should start, and I think we are universal here in that panel, with air quality plans, and then take adaptation and mitigation into account. And these are actually parts of Europe where air quality is particularly low. That was the end of my
Thanks a lot, Diana. No, we're almost out of time, but I think we still have, there was still one question which was posed to Raphael by Hina Chowdhury. Maybe you have seen it already, Rafa.
Yeah.
Do you have any response to that?
Well, not sure I got the question, but it's an interesting topic because yeah, it's a clear. This is interesting because it's a trade-off between the building efficiency and in terms of energy consumption and air quality, because it's regulated by ventilation. So definitely these kind of systems to purify the air, they play a role. But to my knowledge, this is a hot topic in terms of research. So a lot of people are looking now into indoor air quality, and that's have clear connections for energy savings and outdoor air quality, but not that I'm aware that there are specific measures or plans trying to look into that. So it's more on the research side right now, I would say.
Okay. Thanks for looking at that. We also have some audience in Diana's room, I think. It's okay. One thing that I would like to maybe just get Bob to reflect on, because I think we're going to be cut off in a couple of minutes, Bob, is where you think, how much is the overlap between the stakeholder groups who have a real interest in air quality issues and in greenhouse gas emissions, and is that a point? So if there's a really strong overlap, does that make it really a lot easier? And who would be the key players? You know, if you really wanted to push an integration agenda, what should you do?
That's a great question, Richard. May I defer that to both Beatrice and Raphael for their 2 cities? I'd be interested to hear their experience. I don't have any immediate insights on that.
Okay. Beatrice, could you maybe respond quickly?
Well, in Mexico City, there is more and more, I would say, common stakeholders. That's good. I mean, after all these years, people were, I mean, in terms of public education, people is very aware of air pollution, and little by little more on climate change. So I guess it's a good, so we have more or less the same stakeholders. And in the case of the authorities, that the Secretary of Environment has the 2 areas, and that's actually an issue that even for an institution, sometimes you have those silos. I remember when I was in Mexico City, the Secretary of Environment would say, I mean, please talk to each other. I mean, climate change and air quality, why don't you sit and talk about what we have to do? So it is important that leadership of integrating, because there are so many barriers, and it's easy just to go each one on their own way. So, okay. But I would say that yes, there's a lot of common stakeholders.
Very good. And Rafa, your thoughts on that maybe as
Yeah, I pretty much agree, and that's it's as stupid as it seems. I think it's one of the big barriers. It does the climate thing and the air quality. They usually depend on different departments, and that's a huge complexity. And I mean, it might be hard to understand. And another issue is that the administration or the department that is responsible for planning for equality and climate change, they don't have actual responsibilities. So they don't have a say on energy, they don't have a say on traffic management or urbanism, and that calls for larger. We need larger structures, so where the actual people with power and decision on decision making are actually involved. So this has to be very high level.
Okay, good. I think my clock says it's exactly 5 o'clock, so I guess we're going to be cut off pretty soon. Let me just then wrap up by just thanking the panel members and the audience, and also if you're watching on YouTube, I hope you enjoyed the session. I think as Bob mentioned, or Raphael mentioned, that we're working on a paper about this, about the work that the research that Bob's been doing, and it will be involving the 4 panel members and myself. We'll be trying to put a package together, a paper together, and we'll be sharing that. It'll be open access. So if you're interested in that result, in the results of this research, then please stay in touch with us and we'll be happy to share it. So thank you very much, everybody. I look forward to hearing more from you in the future.
Thank you, Richard, for chairing. Thanks,
Yeah.
panel members, for the very interesting presentations.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Very interesting.
Likewise. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye.
Very much.
Thanks, Richard.
Talk
Bye-bye.
soon.
Talk soon.